Will you state your name, please?
Jeff Fort.
It was a summer day in 1968 that Jeff Fort was called to testify in Washington, D.C. before an investigating subcommittee of the United States Senate. But why was a Chicago gang leader the focus of national attention and debate? To answer that question, one has to go back to Woodlawn. Bishop Arthur Brazier.
We were desperate. We were trying to do something about a situation that was literally destroying this community.
The shooting, the killing, the turf wars in Woodlawn just would not stop. Those wars, in turn, spawned another kind of combat, a fight over how to stop the gangs. The battle lines were drawn, community leaders against politicians, cops against clergy, liberals against conservatives. And the lightning rod of this conflict was a man by the name of John Fry.
John Fry was a very prophetic man, a really, truly prophetic man.
We felt that Reverend Fry was very similar to Hitler.
It was John Fry who gave Jeff Fort's gang a home. John Fry was the minister at the First Presbyterian Church of Woodlawn, and he let the Blackstone Rangers use his church as their base of operation.
Reverend Fry gave us the use of the church, not willingly. We tied Reverend Fry up for 4 days. He didn't really want to bow down and give the church to us.
You physically tied him up for 4 days?
Physically tied him up and fed him.
For 4 days?
For 4 days.
Why?
He didn't want drugs and guns in his church.
And so John Fry, you're telling me, was afraid of you and let you have what you wanted?
The man was afraid.
Charles LaPaglia, Fry's associate, says that is a lie and that many lies were told about him and Fry and what was going on at the First Presbyterian Church. John Fry, meanwhile, would argue the gangs were not the problem in Woodlawn, society was.
I think that it is really society that is killing black people.
I think John believed that the Stones had some function beyond being a gang.
I don't think that they would have reached the significance they did had it not been for the First Presbyterian Church and the Reverend John Fry.
He believed that they could be a constructive force in their own community.
But could John Fry's vision of greater opportunity alter the course of the Blackstone Rangers and Jeff Fort? Father Tracy O'Sullivan.
I think John Fry was very creative and committed and a passionate sense of justice. At the same time, I think John Fry was not open to compromise, did not see the complexity of the situation, was not able to see that Jeff Fort and the others were not all good guys, that they weren't straight out angelic. I constantly asked the questions, well, fine, but what about the killings? That was the constant question we had. We never got to a point where the violence stopped.
My office was bombarded constantly by families, by clergymen, asking us what was TWO going to do about the gang problem. Every effort to break up these gangs, youth groups, they all failed.
So you were seeking some way to learn to live with them and for them to learn to live with you?
And so they could make a positive contribution to the community.
At the same time that John Fry was reaching out to the Blackstone Rangers, Arthur Brazier of the Apostolic Church of God had just become the head of the fledgling Woodlawn Organization. Brazier's contribution was to get, despite the objections of Mayor Richard J. Daley, a federal grant worth $1 million. The idea was to use the money to teach both the Blackstone Rangers and the Eastside Disciples job skills, and to use the leadership of those gangs to help run the program, to try to channel that leadership into constructive avenues,
where they can be a benefit to the community rather than a detriment.
It was a bona fide effort to try to take these gangs that were shooting one another down in the street. The police were unable to deal with it, and to try to take them as they were and try to refocus their ideas on something much more constructive. It was an experimental program.
An experiment worth pursuing because the gang war was intense, because business was being extorted to pay protection to the gangs, because Woodlawn was overcrowded, in racial transition, and in turmoil. Something had to be done, but police were appalled at this particular approach, believing it was a naive, liberal solution to a deeply criminal problem. Chicago Police Superintendent Leroy Martin was a resident of Woodlawn at the time.
I guess some of the people were very well-meaning people, but they just created a monster with the money that they gave them, no controls on it.
Police Commander Edward Buckney believed the gangs had become the darlings of liberal America, people who didn't understand the gangs' real motive.
They were in it for the money and whatever other gains could be gotten. You know, anytime you can have somebody like W. Clement Stone give them money, the Sears Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Weibold Foundation, the Kettering Foundation, and all of these kinds of things. And they would, you know, if somebody's constantly giving you money, do you ever think in terms of getting a job? Hell no. And they didn't.
Talk to me about money.
Money. I had a lot to do with getting money to the Blackstone Ranger organization. And if I have any shortcoming, I just didn't get enough money to the organization, because what I got to them, they used incredibly well.
Ben Davis, a PhD from the University of Chicago, was one of a number, including John Fry, who believed that police were oppressive, unjust, and only fueling the violence in Woodlawn. Some of the foundation money Davis would get for Jeff Ford and the Blackstone Rangers would be to bond them out of jail and hire lawyers for them. And do you have any regrets about that?
None.
You had a lot of respect for Jeff Ford.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He is one of the rare human beings.
But the desperate search for alternatives only inflamed the situation. Jeff Ford and the Blackstone Rangers would use the First Presbyterian Church to make and store weapons. Police believe Fry and LaPaglia knew that.
No doubt about it at all.
There are still people today who claim, whether you knew it or not, First Presbyterian was functionally an arsenal. There were guns in there, that there were drugs in there, that there were illegal things going on in there. They're not entirely wrong, are they?
That illegal things probably went on. No, I'm sure there were illegal things that went on in there that we weren't aware of. I'm sure, you know, I mean, weapons were certainly something that was rampant in that community. But our position was to try and disarm and the kids and to cut the violence as much as we possibly can.
And what kind of weapons would you keep in that church?
Carbines, submachine guns, 9mm, you name it.
Meanwhile, over at the job training program, equally intense controversy. Gang members would be paid to come to a job training class taught in large part by gang leaders. There would be immediate charges of gang leaders getting kickbacks.
When the gang members would go to these job classes, how would that work?
Everybody would go to school and get a check, and in turn they would kick back so much of their money.
So there was always a kickback.
Right.
Were there legitimately some kids in those classes in it to learn job skills who later went on to get jobs?
Yeah. Some of them was really serious about it.
Were any of the leadership in the category of serious, hardworking students?
No. Not that I recall.
The program just wasn't working. That was the conclusion of a study done by Dr. Irving Spergel of the University of Chicago. And the reason had as much to do with the adults as the gangs.
It seems to me that the most serious problem with that project was the context, in that you had major conflict among organizations.
For instance?
Well, you had some elements in the political structure that agreed with the project ideas and were supporting it, and some that were opposed to it violently.
Different political leaders had different points of view about it. There was a struggle on every level.
And the gangs had a field day.
Particularly the Black Pistone Nation and Jeff Fort, who, because of the Spergel study and because of the public outcry, would be brought before the McClellan Committee in Washington, a Senate subcommittee investigating whether $1 million in federal money had been misspent, and whether Woodlawn had become a fortress for the gangs. Jeff Fort was called to explain himself to that committee. After stating his name, he walked out. In the years to come, he would be convicted of contempt of Congress charges and the misuse of federal money. But that would hardly mean the end of Jeff Fort or the debate over who he was. Social worker Charles LaPaglia.
I think Jeff was basically good. I think given the opportunity to achieve good things, he would have.
Police Commander Edward Buckney.
Probably when he first joined maybe the group that they called the Blackstone Rangers, there may have been hope. But I think with the coddling and the publicity and all of the other things, I think it's probably a situation that he got into that was too deep and there was no way out.
Father Tracy O'Sullivan.
It became good guy, bad guy, and then people had to make Jeff Fort a great angel or a great devil. Well, Jeff Fort wasn't either an angel nor a devil. He was a human being, and he was talented, and he was moving in certain directions. We wanted to change those directions by opening up new opportunities and new resources. I think we all failed in that regard.